Okay, hi, my name is Ivy Elber. This is Exploring Citizen Journalism for Mac 325. So to start out with context and history of citizen journalism, it's sometimes referred to as grassroots journalism, collaborative media, or guerrilla journalism. It requires community engagement. It does not include official journalists. It emphasizes holding larger institutions accountable, gained traction primarily in the United States during the late 20th century and spread globally along with the rise of the internet. It can have an agenda or want to publicize a certain message, and it uncovers facts that professional journalists would not cover due to alternative forms of information collection. To continue context and history, one common source where citizen journalism is most prevalent is Twitter, and other media sharing apps such as TikTok. Ever since journalists began covering globally significant events, it has only become more popular and easy to access for the general public, sometimes even before traditional media is able to get a story out. And then here's a quote from one of our readings. I'll just read a few lines from it. There have been several high-profile examples where eyewitness accounts and digital recordings from the scene of an incident have helped shape a breaking news story. And examples of this are given, like the 9/11 attacks, Asian tsunami in 2004, and the tube bombing. So to get into some of the pros of citizen journalism, this is a quote from one of our readings, the early adoption and successful use of the internet in the 90s by the indigenous EZLN Zapatista movement in the Chiapas region of Mexico quickly dramatized how new media and grassroots progressivism might synergize, excite the world, and challenge status quo culture and politics. From Conning Kellner. So citizen journalism challenges the gatekeeping roles in our society. More perspective is offered by those that are directly affected by events, and underrepresented communities can have their time in the spotlight. To continue pros, information can get out to the public quicker. This can be a pro and a con, but there's eyewitness accounts of events, personal videos and pictures can be easily posted and circulated quickly, and then call attention to emergencies. It can publicize small community concerned issues that may not be covered by traditional news media outlets, if it's not deemed like newsworthy enough. And here's a quote from Conning Kellner again. The new internet subculture that has erupted around blogging is particularly deserving of analysis here, as bloggers have demonstrated themselves as techno activists, favoring not only democratic self expression and networking, but also global media critique and journalistic socio-political intervention. So, although blogging is no longer as popular as it was in the early 2000s, the ideas behind why people were doing this have spread to other platforms, namely social media apps. I would say mainly TikTok. So really large overview of cons would be journalistic objectivity, potential for manipulation, and individual bias. And I'll get into those in the next slides. So here's just a quick example from one of our in the Jewett reading. It was talking about the Mumbai terrorist attacks. So one of the quotes, just to get it started, was during the crisis, the BBC was keen to incorporate a number of different sources into a live updates page on its website. The aim of this was to provide news, analysis, description, and comment in short snippets as soon as it becomes available. So basically, there were 80 messages being submitted every 5 second period and made it very impossible for them to sort through all of them. They were prioritizing speed over validity during this. So there were a lot of misconceptions and myths that began to circulate. The first being that Indian authorities were attempting to block Twitter in India. This was not true. And the second being that traditional media was being usurped by social networks, which was also not true. To continue, cons, one of the big ones is graphic imagery. It's not something that many people want to witness, but with the spread of posting raw footage, it happens extremely often and often remains posted until brought to the attention of moderators, which can be days, weeks, never. Especially common on Twitter, where people usually go for real and original footage of an event. Since the nature of Twitter just makes it very difficult to comb through every single post that is violating guidelines. So just another quote from one of our readings. The emergence of citizen journalism has been met with some hostility in certain quarters. The term points to the unprofessional status of the amateur reporter, but it also implies that professional journalists are something other than citizens. And then this is a concept that was brought up in one of our readings, citizen camera witnessing. So to start out, as a point of departure, I argue we must recognize how the conditions of the post-2001 global visual economy bring forth what has become the very entry card to presenting oneself as witness today, graphic imagery that bears the mark of incontrovertible truth. So the fact that the public is constantly exposed to disturbing and graphic imagery through unfiltered videos, I think is a large con of citizen journalism in the digital age. And then another quote from her is, hence, ordinary people, including local residents, holiday makers, soldiers, democratic activists, insurgents, and terrorists, are now labeled enabled to bypass established editorial and censorial filters and turn their personal record of an event into a public testimony that might disrupt official perspectives, carefully crafted and provided to the mainstream news media. So I think this can be really dangerous, especially if it does somehow become more trusted and popular than traditional news media. So I thought that was interesting to point out. And then I did some other research on some articles exploring this concept. This first one is called From Personal to Professional, Exploring the Influences on Journalists' Evaluation of Citizen Journalism Credibility. So this paper investigates what makes journalists accept citizen journalism and what makes them pass it off as illegitimate. Quick quote is, the most current paradigm shift triggered by the prevalence of news media technologies stripped professional journalists of the exclusivity to report news and empowered ordinary citizens to take up the information dissemination role. And then studies focusing on how traditional journalists consider the legitimacy of the works of their online counterparts, however, present rather critical views of citizen journalism practice based on normative values and professional routines. So basically, while the public is relatively in favor of citizen journalism and thinks it is trustworthy, journalists still question the ethics and the validity of guerrilla journalism attempts and think that um, there needs to still be integrity held in the journalistic position and what they owe the public and kind of the pact they make, since they're not technically citizen journalists, they're journalists. So I thought that was an interesting article. And my second one is called Media Freedom in the Age of Citizen Journalism. This is a book review, and it talks about the issues concerning free speech in terms of what citizen journalists can post. So a quote from this one is, these citizens have become active participants in the public sphere through the production and publication of content, typically online. Thus, they contribute to the debate on current affairs, expose abuses of power, and ensure the diversity of opinions, and therefore there is no justification for denying them the right to exercise their freedom of the media and the opportunities that this right affords. However, according to Coe, this right should only be afforded to citizen journalists publishing on current affairs. So they were writing about this book called that Coe wrote, which was basically arguing against the fact that citizen journalists writing about news and free speech are not the same thing. So he believes that freedom of speech and media freedom are two separate rights, and that media freedom is something that journalists take charge of and understand and kind of are in a bond with this idea, while citizen journalism journalists aren't held to this, which can be dangerous and kind of maybe don't have the community's best interests at heart. So I thought that was an interesting perspective from Coe. So according to Coe, the media must act in the public interest, aim at informing the public, and follow standards of conduct that take into account the rights of others. In return, they are entitled to additional protection in relation to content aimed at providing information on issues of public interest compared to other persons exercising the right to freedom of expression or to other media which are not involved in reporting on issues of public interest. So by this mindset, citizen journalists should not attempt to take on the duties of journalists since they're not following the standards of conduct. And so since citizens are not bound to social responsibility, it is unethical, according to Coe, for this practice to continue and to continue to grow. Sorry. Here's my references. And